Hello again. I'm going to start this video by asking a bit of an out-of-pocket question, and it's all to do with some of the background characters that you might have forgotten from SpongeBob SquarePants. Bit of a strange start, sorry about that. Alrighty, let's get to the big question. What happens when we mix our very muscly but friendly neighbourhood fish Frank with a Grecian legend that is Poseidon? You get this guy. I reckon he should be called Frank the Second. And don't you worry, he's not just going to be, floating around ominously in the sea. Instead, we're going to position him so that he's lounging. I feel like Frank's story is that he's just, sunbathing on a rock, chilling, minding his own business, but in reality he's luring in those sailors who want to steal him away for their museum of curiosities. As soon as they get close by, they get dazzled by his muscles, and then whoop-ha! They get walloped by the trident. All fun and games, right? I do feel like Frank's got a little bit more, dynamism, a little bit more fun in his pose, so he's a little bit different from anything I've made before. I think it's going to be a ton of fun, so I'm really excited to get started. Let's head to Blender. To get started, I basically just popped down some quick shapes into Blender and followed my reference as a guide. This is pretty much the first time I've made the effort to create a more flat, profile style sketch of a new sculpted friend, and it really made the getting started bit so much easier because I was basically just tracing. Work smarter, not harder, people. Hench pecs incoming!
Oh wow.
Now moving on to the refining stage, I didn't really include any clips because I did think it might be a little bit boring. I mean, if you did want to see all the refining bits, just tell me off in the comments below. But something super cool is that our mer friend has gone through quite the Pokemon evolution. He went from an egg to a Squirtle. Clearly because he's been eating way too many evolution stones, he's now a freaking Blastoise. The heck? Now that we've got our mer friend's body all sculpted, looking like an Adonis, it's time to work on the details. I want to make sure that the face is perfectly moulded to the body because that will make it a lot easier to 3D print later. And can I just highlight, there is absolutely no shame in reusing geometry. I don't know if it's like the suffering artist in me that thought I had to do everything from scratch, but girl, just make life easier for yourself. Now, it isn't really often that I have good ideas, but I feel like this one's a corker. I don't know why, but Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy are pretty much seared in my brain, and I think it's only fitting that I pay homage to them in my design. Obviously, I don't want to outright steal the starfish nose idea, I want to be inspired. Homage. So we're just going to sub it for a seashell nose instead. Now, I'm not really sure if he's, born with the seashell or whether it just covers his very tiny nose. All I know is he doesn't want to talk about it, okay? Awkward. The last little bit we need to add to Frank is the little webby things that you can see on the sketch. I did do some quick research on the anatomy of a fish, and it turns out they're actually called dorsal fins. Oh, by the way, I have a fun fact for you all about dorsal fins. They don't just exist to make sea creatures look more dashing, they're actually used to help with sudden turning and stabilising against rolling, which is obviously very helpful when you've been chased by money-hungry sailors.
I am speed.
As the final piece will be sitting on my bookshelf, it's very likely we'll only really see the details on the front side. Still, for Frank's sake, I'm going to add a bunch of dorsal fins around his head and down his back. I don't really want to leave him bold because that would be super lazy of me, and of course our Frank deserves better. I'm pretty sure you're going to agree with me, but he's looking absolutely dashing right now. The only problem right now is that he's got that, floating ominously look. And we've got to fix that. My first attempt did include using the grab tool, but as you can see, it made him look a little bit, Flat Stanley-ish. Sorry to butt in, but I thought I'd give a little bit of context on who Flat Stanley is. He's a character from a book I used to read when I was younger, and I think something falls on him and then suddenly he's, flat. I seem to recall him being mailed through a mailbox at one point. I don't know, it kind of feels like a bit of a fever dream, but the internet tells me he's real. real in the context of a book, I mean. He was a book. He was in a book, that's what I mean. Instead, I went down the route of giving him some armature bones. I feel like only the tail really needed some, as I would prefer not to keep changing the position one vertex at a time. Honestly, that just sounds torturous. Now for the highlight of my sculpting career. I'm going to make some rocks. Ooh. I think we're just going to keep things simple. We'll just get a bunch of cubes, add a subdivision modifier, and make some small changes so that there's different heights and different sizes as well. Now I know, why would I make an oceany rock so smooth? Don't worry about it, I'll just fix that in post. By post, I mean I'll just smush a bunch of clay on it later. Well, I guess now you can see why future Rhea is always mad at past Rhea. The last thing we need to focus on is rejigging the body so Frank can get that siren-esque leaning look going on. What I kind of tend to do is make tiny little adjustments and then just stare at it for a little while and decide if I like it or not. The one thing I do have to keep reminding myself is that every time I make a change, I need to check the model from all angles. Otherwise, I'll suddenly notice an arm's popped out of its socket or something, and I should probably fix that before I get to the printing stage. And for the eagle-eyed amongst you, you'll notice that the trident just kind of, pops up out of nowhere. Let's kind of just pretend that it's one of its mythical properties and it can just apparate out of nowhere. And not because I've got to hit record. I do believe that's all the Blender modelling finished. I guess it's time to get 3D printing. So I have a teeny tiny little update for you guys. My other 3D printer broke. I mean, I don't really know what happened. All I did was change the filament and then suddenly it just started under extruding and there's nothing I could do to fix it. I kind of then just decided to bite the bullet and buy a new 3D printer. I wanted to anyway and I'd been saving up for quite a while, so it was quite the investment and it did burn a massive hole in my pocket, but I do think it was really worth it because it's just made things so much easier. Besides all that, meet Barnaby the bamboo. Isn't he sweet? I put him through the ringer for the past couple of days and he has been such a dream. I reckon because I've had no problems so far, I'm just going to print out the final pieces. I mean, I do know the model works considering I've done quite a few test pieces with the old printer, so I'm just going to give it a go. Who knows, I might really regret that. But considering my success rate so far, I think it's going to be okay. Did I just jinx myself? I've just finished printing off all the little bits and pieces and I stand by exactly what I said before. Barnaby is an absolute dreamboat. So our little merman would have taken 10 hours and a half, I think, to print on high quality on the old printer. On Barnaby, 3 hours and a half. Where the heck did that time go? I don't get it, I really don't. I mean, either I've mastered time itself or something, or it's witchcraft. My flabbers are absolutely gasted. Alrighty. So before we can get to the fun painting bit, there's actually quite a bit of prep we need to do for our new friend. First things first, we've got to sand down all the 3D prints to help smooth out some of those layer lines, but also we want to help get a little bit of texture so the paint sticks a little bit better. So remember when I said earlier that I would just, add the texture to the rock later? Well, later is now. I didn't really mess with it too much and smooth it out because I wanted it to look a little bit rough. Like the rock spent centuries being walloped by the ocean. I will admit that just bodging on clay on something and then not really worrying about how it looks too much is very therapeutic. Definitely would recommend. I'm not really sure why I gave the mermaid tail the same bodging clay technique, but I was very kind with the smoothing. I think the only thing I really achieved here was giving Frank a bit of a plumper butt, which I suppose really isn't a bad thing. I do think the proportions did end up looking a lot better, so it's a very happy coincidence. With the scales, I had a very foolhardy notion that I could make them individually with the clay. I gave up on that very quickly. Quite frankly, I just didn't want to sit there for hours doing the same thing over and over again. I mean, it's not really worth hurting my back over, so I needed to find something that was way less tedious but worked just as well. And And you know what I didn't know existed before I started researching? 3D paint. Now it wasn't very quick drying, which is fair enough because I can't always have it all. But it did hold that teardrop shape wonderfully. Actually, thinking about it, I'm kind of glad that the paint wasn't quick drying because I had to wipe it off quite a few times because it didn't quite look right. My first few attempts were really densely packed to the point it gave me trypophobia. I mean, we are trying to entice those poachers over, not gross them out and scare them away. I feel like now you can just see all the individual scales and it isn't too overwhelming. I hope you enjoyed watching the time lapse because I found it super satisfying. As you can see, Fred is just a little bit bald, and that's just because he's missing some dorsal fins. Ultimately, I did decide not to 3D print them. Let me just quickly state for the record, it's not because I think Barnaby the Bamboo isn't up to the task. However, I do think the pieces would end up printing really thin, and as you may know, I am super clumsy. Instead, I decided to go down the route of using the ends of a cocktail stick, and just, sticking it down with some super glue, so even if I do accidentally drop him, I can just stick him back together. You'd think that'd be pretty easy, right? Nope. I just kept on dropping all the pieces and ended up with loads of glue on my fingers. And as you know, super glue is notoriously hard to get off. For someone who loves crafting, I'm not very delicate and it genuinely took a few good solid days to get the glue off my fingers. Despite all the shenanigans, it did work out. As you can see, Frank went through quite the metamorphosis, and that's because I sprayed him with some primer off camera. It doesn't seem I've done the best job because some of the purple PLA is still showing through. Whoopsie doopsies. When you prime a 3D print, it's actually supposed to help the paint stick better, but for Frank it didn't really work that way. Although it did take like 10 layers to get the paint to look opaque, the thickness of the final look really helped to hide those layer lines, so I can't be that mad. I really do love the purple and green colour combo. It just feels super calming to me and maybe even a little bit nostalgic. Does it remind you of anyone perchance? Or perhaps... I do feel like the skin was a little bit too dark. So I ultimately decided to add another 50 layers of paint to help tone it down a little bit. He's one thick boy, and not only in muscles, but also in layers of paint. And because I am super fickle, I ended up bringing back that dark green paint and painting it on the face mask and on the kind of webbing of the dorsal fins to help bring a little bit of colour variance to the body. I've never really been the kind of girl who's able to paint inside the lines, but I'm trying really hard to get Frank's eyes right. I wonder if the steadiness I'm looking for just comes with practice. For some reason it'll be fine, it'll be all good, and then 2 seconds later it's like I get a little twitch and suddenly there's black paint where it definitely shouldn't be. Luckily, I do make sure to save a little bit of each paint that I've mixed so I can fix any mistakes. It has definitely come in clutch. This is kind of the part of the video where I got a little bit anxious. I only had a few things to finish on Frank and I really didn't fancy messing them up. Well, to help me procrastinate, I put him to the side and then got to painting my rock instead. Our first step was slathering on a neutral grey tone as a base colour. And then it was very quickly followed up with step 2, which included mixing up a lighter grey that could be stippled on with a sponge to give some texture. Step 3, carry on stippling, but with a darker grey to add a little bit more depth and shadow. And finally, step 4, go back to the lighter grey because I added far too much dark grey, plus it adds a little bit of highlight. I think it's about time I put my big girl boots back on and focus on finishing off painting Frank. I think I've procrastinated enough. So imagine if you picked up a fish and then lifted it up to the light. It doesn't matter if the fish is big, small, square or triangle, it really does not matter. Even if you move the fish ever so slightly, you'll see all sorts of different colours and tones reflecting off. And that's the vibe I want to bring to Frank's tail. As you can see in the clip, I'm adding different shades of blues and purples to individual scales to help add some variety and fun as well. And just a little tidbit for later, I'm going to add little bits of gold as well to match the trident, so ooh, sparkly. Now considering that I'm dotting on the cheeks, it must mean we're almost finished. Oh my goodness, how exciting! Clearly, I got so excited that I forgot to pay attention to the focus of the camera. Now that we've added Frank the Merman's little smirk, I think it's time to see the final piece. Let's go!
I'm ready, I'm ready, I'm ready.
Alrighty my friends, that does mark the end of the video. Thank you all so much for joining me whilst I brought Frank the French? He ain't French. Frank the Hench Merman to life. He's a little bit silly, but I kind of just want to make all the silly things. If you did enjoy the video, please feel free to leave me a like or subscribe because there's so many more shenanigans to come. Beyond that, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.